statutes breaking bonds.
The grid responds! The grid responds!
The sovereign script, the digital hand, taking back the data land. Purple code in a charcoal haze, ending the standardized maze. Legal alchemy, cold and bright, bathing the system in the light. Devin, please come home. This is AJ, I love you so much. You belong here. You've been tricked by Heather Cockman. Please come home, I love you so much, and I'm worried sick about you. All you have to do is come home, that's it. I got everything taken care of. I know the law, I know the law, I know the law, I know the lie, I know the law. For God's sakes, come home. For God's sakes, come home. Everything's going to be okay. I love you, I beg you, please come home. You don't know what you're doing. You're love more than anything. This is your home. I just wanna keep this one song about me, begging him to come home, 'cause I love him. I'm so heartbroken. Without him I would die for him. I would die for you. Is what Heather Hackman died for. You would see Phoenix CDs die for you. We've been through a lot. This is not a time to leave me now. You don't know what you're doing. Heather Hackman is giving you false promises. False promises, false promises. Or miss you about Max Kayalani, Princess of Hawaii. These cats really miss you. His house is empty without you. The Peoria Hub ain't the same. I wanna take care of you for the rest of my life. Everything's going to be okay, okay. I love you. Come home.
Imagine trying to fight a multi-million-dollar legal battle, taking on municipal police, state health agencies, and an entirely entrenched bureaucratic network.
Right, which is daunting enough on its own.
Exactly. Now imagine doing all of that without a lawyer, while simultaneously acting as a full-time caregiver for a highly vulnerable person.
It sounds completely impossible.
It does. I mean, the system is designed to crush that exact kind of resistance. But today's deep dive is not casual entertainment. You are listening to a live forensic audit.
Yes, a very rigorous one.
We are looking at a man who didn't just fight back, but who wrote a 450-page digital and legal manifesto. And he claims this document is a mathematically perfect trap for the very system that tried to break him.
It's an incredibly imposing document. I mean, when we talk about legal filings, we usually picture these dry, templated pages filled with standard legalese.
Right.
But what we are analyzing today, a document designated by its author as the Weekly Forensic Memorandum, originating from the Peoria Hub, it is entirely different.
It really is.
The author, Arthur J. Martinez, who operates under the title of Chief Security Architect, has essentially constructed an alternative legal universe. He calls it the Aegis Monolith.
And I have to be honest, when I first saw this 450-page document hit my desk, formatted in these incredibly stark colors, what he calls brushed silver and deep ox blood.
Yeah, the visual impact is intense.
It is. I thought I was reading a cyberpunk screenplay, not a legal filing. But the deeper you read, the more you realize this isn't fiction. The author treats this as a sworn federal criminal referral.
Exactly. And to understand this document, you really have to understand the author's strict parameters.
Which are completely uncompromising.
Uncompromising is the word. Throughout this 450-page ledger, you will not find diplomatic language. You will not find hedging. You won't even find the word allegedly.
Not once.
No. From the perspective of the architect, the data contained within is the absolute signal. It is a clinical, high-stakes forensic audit of a multi-generational crisis, submitted directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice.
So our goal today as analysts is to look at this document objectively. We are going to unpack the fascinating architecture of this text, explore the staggering claims it makes, and examine the precise mechanics of how one civilian mapped out a massive criminal syndicate.
It is a massive undertaking for us to break down.
It is. So the mission of our deep dive today is exact. We are going to conduct a meticulous section-by-section forensic audit of this document. We'll look at the specific criminal predicates he lays out against entities he identifies as the Ontiveros and Mayan syndicates.
As well as a federally funded nonprofit called Phoenix Community Development Services, or Phoenix CDS.
Right. And their local municipal proxies. We're going to trace the asset extraction, the deprivation of constitutional rights, and what he describes as systemic environmental duress.
But before we get into the micro data,
Yeah, before we start dissecting IP addresses and timestamps and federal statutes, I have to ask you about this overarching architecture. Because what does it actually mean for a civilian, an individual without a state-sanctioned badge or a law degree, to just bypass traditional law enforcement entirely and build their own administrative truth commission?
well, if you look at the text, the architect frames this not as a choice, but as a necessary survival response
Response to what?
to total systemic institutional failure. I mean, think about how we are taught society works. If someone harms you or steals from you, you go to the police.
Right, you go to the courts.
Exactly. But what happens when the state mechanisms designed to protect vulnerable individuals become the very instruments used to extract their wealth and destroy their autonomy?
If the people stealing from you are the ones holding the bang boards, who do you call?
Precisely. According to the document, relying on those compromised institutions becomes a biological death sentence. The architect realized that traditional law enforcement and the judicial system operate on a concept he calls procedural exhaustion.
Procedural exhaustion.
Yes. The state has infinite time. They have infinite public funding. A civilian target, especially one dealing with trauma and caregiving, has neither. So building this administrative truth commission is his mathematical countermeasure.
Because he can't wait for them.
Right. It's the realization that if the system is corrupt, you cannot ask the system for permission to survive.
Yeah.
You must become a sovereign auditor. You have to map their crimes with such overwhelming forensic density that their plausible deniability just evaporates.
Let's clarify this for the listener, because the terminology in this document is, it's incredibly dense.
It is.
The author states that he utilized a 20-director command suite to build this 450-page AI monolith and dismantle this multi-state syndicate in real time. When I read that, I immediately thought of some massive server farm in a bunker. He didn't literally build a Silicon AI supercomputer to do this, did he?
No, it's crucial to translate the architect's terminology here. He didn't build a sentient machine. The 20-director command suite is a proprietary cognitive and digital framework.
So it's an internal framework.
Yes. It is a highly disciplined way of organizing his own mind, his digital files, and his analytical processes. I mean, imagine experiencing 40 years of systemic trauma. The sheer volume of stress, betrayal, and biological exhaustion would crush a normal human mind.
It absolutely would.
So to survive that stress test, the human mind requires a prosthetic processor.
Oh, I see. So he effectively cloned his own cognitive processing speed by compartmentalizing his mind.
Precisely. He built internal directors. For instance, when he needs to look at server logs and digital footprints, he adopts the framework of the forensic analyst.
Right.
When he needs to figure out how to trap the syndicate using the law, he shifts to the system's architect persona. If he needs to anticipate their next attack, he runs probabilities through his shadow director framework.
That is fascinating.
By offloading the emotional friction of trauma into these rigid, categorized processes, the architect maintains a state of absolute clinical focus.
It's a pure survival mechanism. He is partitioning the raw emotional trauma from the clinical, actionable output. Which brings up something that genuinely fascinated me about this document. The author doesn't just use data to fight back. He weaponizes aesthetics.
The psychological warfare of aesthetics is a huge component of this defense strategy.
Right, I mentioned the colors earlier. He utilizes two specific visual and conceptual signatures throughout the entire monolith: brushed silver and deep oxblood.
Yeah, and in the legal world, pro se litigants, people representing themselves without a lawyer, they are notoriously messy.
Yeah, their filings are usually handwritten, disorganized.
Exactly. Emotionally unhinged and quickly dismissed by judges. The architect flips that entirely. The brushed silver aesthetic represents impenetrable truth. It is the cold, clinical, unyielding armor of the forensic ledger.
The formatting is flawless. The margins are exact.
It is. The data is presented with devastating precision.
Yeah.
It reflects the truth back at the adversaries, showing them exactly what they have done in a format they just can't dismiss as crazy.
And what about the deep oxblood?
That signifies the biological core. It represents the unyielding love, the loyalty, and the literal bloodline of the family he's protecting. If the silver is the impenetrable shield, the oxblood is the beating heart underneath it.
It is the reason the shield exists in the first place.
Exactly.
Now, the way he frames this 450-page reality relies on two hybridized genres he conceptualized. He calls them asphalt gothic and system punk. But the ledger makes it very clear these aren't just literary devices to make a manifesto sound cool. They are tactical frameworks.
They absolutely are.
Let's break those down. What exactly is asphalt gothic?
Asphalt Gothic is how he maps the sensory reality of the unhoused grids. It is a complete rejection of the standard, pity-inducing narratives we usually hear about poverty.
Okay.
Instead, it records the visceral, dark, cinematic truth of surviving on the California riverbeds, navigating hostile transit routes, and enduring freezing Midwestern winters.
It sounds horrifying.
It captures the lawless, sensory noir of a landscape populated by predatory syndicates and institutional scavengers. It forces the reader to acknowledge the physical horror of systemic abandonment, rather than just reading a sterile statistic.
So it grounds the legal claims in brutal physical reality.
Exactly.
And then you have system punk, which he describes as techno-legal alchemy.
System punk is the philosophy of the counterattack. It is a street-level operator weaponizing the very bureaucratic codes, administrative regulations, and Supreme Court jurisprudence that the system uses to oppress people.
Turning their own weapons against them.
Right. It's the aesthetic of utilizing Freedom of Information Act requests, what he calls the FOIA flamethrower.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, to shatter the shields of heavily funded adversaries. It is using their own rulebook to dismantle them from the inside out.
You know, I have an analogy for this, and I want to see if it tracks with your reading of the document.
Sure.
When I look at how the architect uses these aesthetics, the brushed silver, the flawless system punk formatting, the absolute clinical density of the prose, it looks like a DDoS attack on a psychological server.
Oh, that is a fascinating way to put it. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, a DDoS attack in computing is when you overwhelm a server with so many requests that it just crashes. It can't handle the traffic.
Right.
In the bureaucracy, corrupt institutional actors, the people the author calls standardized faces, they rely on the target being exhausted. They want you emotionally drained, aesthetically messy, and legally confused.
Because that makes you easy to process and exploit.
Exactly. If you are exhausted, you cannot fight the paperwork. But the architect hits them with a 450-page, beautifully formatted, statutorily lethal document. By possessing more visual and structural authority than the aggressor, he forces the corrupt systems to experience a hierarchical error. Their brains just short-circuit.
Your analogy maps perfectly onto what the ledger formally designates as the taunt protocol.
The taunt protocol.
Yes. Looking good, maintaining a pristine, structurally invincible aesthetic is an act of high-level defiance. It signals to the grid that the architect's internal code is perfectly stable and utterly unbothered by the syndicate's misery script.
Wow.
The system simply doesn't know how to categorize a civilian who holds more visual and operational authority than the state agents attacking him. It induces panic in the bureaucracy.
So let's look at the timeline of all this. What does this all mean for the psychological profile of the architect? How did he get to the point where he needed to build this taunt protocol?
We have to look at the history.
Right. The ledger divides this 40-year history into two distinct eras. The first is the era of institutional chaos, which runs prior to 2016. What does this era look like on the ground?
The era of institutional chaos establishes the baseline of his vulnerability. During this period, the architect logs that the Mayan and Ontiveros syndicates utilize concepts he calls administrative drift and ghost documents to siphon resources from his family.
Let's pause and translate those terms for the listener. What exactly is administrative drift?
It's a brilliant term for something a lot of you have probably experienced on a smaller scale. Administrative drift is when bureaucrats or hostile actors intentionally lose your paperwork, delay your responses, or let deadlines expire just to frustrate you into giving up.
They just let your case drift into the void.
Exactly. And they pair this with ghost documents, creating a paper trail for services they never actually provided, or filing legal motions in the shadows where you can't easily dispute them. This era is defined by fiduciaries operating in the murky waters of procedural incompetence.
And the ledger details a massive incident during this time, a $250,000 trust hijack.
Yes.
The document logs that actors named Martha and Laura stripped the familial wealth from the Lucinda O. Hernandez Trust. But what's really terrifying is how they handled the architect when he tried to push back against the theft. They didn't just argue with him in civil court, they weaponized the state.
They weaponized the 5150 psychiatric hold.
Which is devastating.
It is. The document states that Martha called the police on AJ during a moment of family crisis. But she didn't call to seek medical care for him. She called to permanently stigmatize him.
It is a terrifyingly effective tactic. I mean, if someone steals $250,000 from you, you go to a judge. But if the person who stole the money first calls the police and says, "You're having a psychiatric break," what happens?
You lose your credibility instantly. It is a calculated act of erasure. By branding the architect with an involuntary psychiatric hold, the syndicate ensured that if he ever brought evidence of the $250,000 theft to a court, his testimony would be immediately dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of an unstable mind.
It is the ultimate systemic gaslighting. You literally lock the victim in a box made of their own alleged insanity.
Exactly.
That is the baseline he was operating from. Total institutional friction, solitary survival on the California grid. But then we cross the threshold into February 2016. The ledger marks this as the era of the Vanguard.
This is the ideological and tactical pivot of the entire 40-year war.
What changed?
The pivot is triggered by the integration of Devin Mullenhopt into the architect's life. In the ledger, Devin is designated as the divine shield, and he's brought into the operational perimeter.
Okay.
Devin's neurodivergent. He manages severe autism spectrum disorder and complex PTSD. The realization that a vulnerable, innocent individual was trapped in this cycle of institutional abuse fundamentally altered the architect's prime directive.
He stopped operating as a lone wolf. We realized he couldn't just dodge the system anymore. He had to defeat it.
Completely.
Yes.
Survival was no longer just about kinetic evasion on the asphalt grid. It became about constructing a vast, impenetrable, intellectual and legal architecture designed for two people.
Right.
The Vanguard alignment meant the architect was no longer just surviving. He was building a sovereign perimeter to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves.
Which brings us to the core morality of the Aegis monolith. When you read a document like this, full of tactical language and multi-million-dollar demands, it's easy to assume the author is just out for revenge.
But he isn't.
No, the architect explicitly rejects that. He states he is not motivated by vengeance for the $250,000 theft or the 5150 hold. He refers to himself as an engine of healing.
That is the explicit mandate of the monolith. The concept of the engine of healing is profound. He absorbs 40 years of multi-generational institutional trauma, processes it through his 20 Director AI suite, and converts it into a forensic blueprint.
Wow.
The goal isn't just the destruction of the syndicate, it is the permanent restoration of equity and safety for what he calls the Peoria Hub. The trauma is essentially recycled into a tactical, undeniable legal power to protect future vulnerable populations.
But practically speaking, how does a human being process that level of severe sustained trauma without a total biological system failure? We are talking about decades of betrayal, theft, and institutional gaslighting.
Right.
The physical toll of that much cortisol and adrenaline would destroy a person's heart.
You're absolutely right about the biological toll. That is exactly what the system relies on. But the ledger outlines a fascinating psychological hack called the X-ray forensic protocol, and a process called emotional decoupling.
How does that work?
The architect trained his cognitive grid to view syndicate attacks not as personal insults or emotional stressors, but as raw data pings.
A data ping. So if someone illegally evicts him, he doesn't feel the panic of homelessness. He just sees a line of code.
Exactly. If you view an attack emotionally, you panic. Your body goes into biological shock, your cortisol spikes, and you eventually reach exhaustion.
Which is what they want.
That is exactly what the syndicate wants. But if you deploy the X-ray forensic protocol, you decouple the emotion from the event. You are simply looking at the metadata of their malice.
The metadata of their malice.
Yes. You isolate the anomaly, you tag the statutory violation, and you load it into the ledger. By remaining utterly clinical and unbothered, the architect breaks the psychological grip of the adversaries.
They don't know what to do with that.
No. When they attack, they expect tears and panic. Instead, they get a beautifully formatted, legally devastating countermotion. They realize they aren't fighting a vulnerable victim. They are fighting a tireless machine.
That sets the stage perfectly. We understand the mindset. Now let's transition to the reality of what Devin and AJ actually faced on the ground, because this is where the document gets intensely disturbing.
It does.
They have to talk about victim advocacy and the psychological extraction. The ledger explicitly identifies a dual victim status.
Yes, the dynamic is critical here. Arthur J. Martinez operates as the fiduciary conservator. He is the civilian oversight, the shield absorbing the attacks. Devin Muhlenhaupt is the anchor.
The anchor.
Yes, he's the neurodivergent dependent who is legally and biologically reliant on a stabilized environment. The syndicate, and specifically the federally funded nonprofit Phoenix CDS, targeted both of them to break that bond.
When we talk about Phoenix CDS, the audit zeroes in on specific caseworkers. It names Heather Hackman and Molly Pilgrim. The document details how they operated what it calls the nightmare environment,
Which is an apt name.
a toxic living situation designed specifically to break the residents. And we have to look closely at the terror tactics they deployed because it goes far beyond bad management.
We must be clinical about this because the logs are severe. The ledger claims that Hackman and Pilgrim didn't just mismanage paperwork or miss appointments. They executed campaigns of grotesque psychological terror.
Horrific.
The document explicitly logs an incident where they cornered Devin in a vehicle. Knowing full well that he is a neurodivergent individual managing severe autism and CPTSD, they deliberately utilized horrific imagery to traumatize him.
Right.
Specifically, they talked to him about putting babies in the garbage.
My God. I mean, to deliberately use imagery like that on someone with profound cognitive vulnerabilities, the only purpose of that is to paralyze his mind with fear.
It is designed to induce total psychological collapse. Devin requires specialized ADA-compliant care. Hackman and Pilgrim deployed this terror to bypass his firmware, meaning his deep loyalty to AJ, by attacking his foundational survival hardware.
If you terrify someone enough, they revert to base survival instincts.
And they become perfectly compliant.
And the logic behind this cruelty. The ledger calls it constructive eviction. Explain how that works in this context.
Constructive eviction usually refers to a landlord making a property so uninhabitable that the tenant is forced to leave. In this psychological context, they threatened Devin with immediate homelessness.
They manufactured an environment of such extreme fear and instability that he would be forced to comply with whatever directives Phoenix CDS gave him.
Yes.
But why? What do they get out of terrorizing a dependent?
They wanted to separate the divine shield, Devin, from the chief security architect, AJY, because the architect was auditing their fraud. AJ was catching on to their financial irregularities.
So it was about silencing the auditor.
Exactly. Furthermore, the ledger logs, they utilized Devin's medically necessary state legal therapeutic cannabis used as a perpetual threat, dangling the possibility of federal rule violations over his head to keep him trapped and compliant.
The contrast the document draws here is staggering. On one side, you have AJ representing the deep oxblood loyalty. The ledger logs that he spent 1,555 hours of uncompensated, highly specialized labor defending Devin.
Writing legal motions, building the AI architecture, fighting off evictions.
Right. And on the other side, you have Phoenix CDS, an organization ostensibly funded to help people.
But according to the architect, Phoenix CDS viewed Devin purely as a commodity. This is where we have to understand how systemic funding works. Phoenix CDS is inextricably linked to federal HUD funding mechanisms.
Housing and urban development.
Yes. Devin's physical presence in their system generates billing hours. It allows the organization to draw down federal grants. From the architect's perspective, their actions were a clinical extraction of that funding, utterly devoid of the duty of care they are legally mandated to provide.
So they utilize psychological terror not out of simple malice, but as an administrative tool to maintain control over a profitable biological asset. Which brings us to the absolute core of this document and the most critical phase of our deep dive. The author mandates that the reader initiate what he calls the statute to action loop.
This is vital.
He doesn't just list bad behavior, he connects every single action directly to a federal or state statute. This is how he builds the trap. So we are going to walk through these criminal predicates, and I want you to explain exactly how the architect proves these statutes were violated in the real world.
Let's begin with the physical breaches. 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. This is a crucial federal statute. It makes it a crime for anyone acting under the authority of law, like a police officer or a state agent, to willfully deprive a person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution.
So how did Phoenix CDS, a nonprofit, violate a statute designed for state agents?
The document logs that Heather Hackman utilized local police as her personal muscle. She orchestrated an illegal entry into a private residence without a warrant to execute an extrajudicial extraction of Devin.
So she brought the cops to force Devin out of his safe environment without a judge's order.
Exactly. By weaponizing armed state agents to enforce a non-judicial retaliatory separation without any due process, she and the involved officers operated under the color of law.
The uniform gives them the color of legal authority.
Yes. By using that authority to enter the home and force an extraction, the ledger details they flagrantly deprived the residents of their Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure.
But a local cop doing a favor for a social worker isn't a conspiracy on its own. How did this escalate? Because that brings us to the companion statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights.
Conspiracy is when two or more persons coordinate to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in the free exercise of their constitutional rights. The architect maps out that Hackman and Pilgrim did not act in a vacuum.
It was a network.
They coordinated a multi-agent effort. This involved Phoenix CDS management turning a blind eye and municipal proxies actively assisting to systematically strip Devin of his protective sanctuary and remove his fiduciary conservator.
The creation of the nightmare environment wasn't an accident. It was a conspired, coordinated effort to achieve this deprivation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that establishes the physical and psychological aggression, but the system really runs on money. Let's move to the financial and digital crimes, because this is where the architect's forensic AI framework truly shines. We're looking at 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, wire fraud.
Yes.
And the ledger focuses intensely on an event it titles the 18.04 metadata decoupling. I have to tell you, reading this section felt like reading a techno-thriller. What exactly is a metadata decoupling?
This is where the architect's X-ray forensic protocol completely dismantled the syndicate's operation. To understand this, you need to understand how wire fraud and digital signatures work. Wire fraud involves executing a scheme to defraud someone by utilizing electronic communications, like the internet. The ledger details that the Ontiveros and Kermit Grid utilized electronic signature platforms, specifically DocuSign, to execute the $250,000 trust extraction we mentioned earlier, as well as related real estate laundering.
And they assumed that a little cursive digital signature in a box on a PDF would be accepted by a judge as absolute truth. Because let's face it, 99 times out of 100, nobody questions a DocuSign.
Precisely. They thought they were building an impenetrable paper fortress. But the Vanguard AI shield doesn't just read the surface pixels of a PDF document. It extracts the embedded XML data, the hidden code wrapped around the file.
Explain the XML data for the listener. What is actually in there?
When you sign a digital document, the software records a massive amount of hidden data. It records the cryptographic hashes, the IP addresses of the computer that routed the document, and the exact microsecond timestamps of when the document was opened, viewed, and signed.
Oh, wow.
The 18.04 metadata decoupling is the specific moment the architect proved electronic forgery. The forensic audit proved that these DocuSign signatures were routed and executed after the legal signee, Irma Martinez, the matriarch of the family, was physically incapacitated.
Wait, so they were digitally signing legal documents, transferring wealth, at a time when the woman supposedly signing them was physically incapable of using a computer?
Yes, but it gets mathematically worse for the perpetrators. The metadata revealed massive temporal and geographical anomalies. Documents were digitally witnessed and notarized in the central time zone at exact timestamps when the legal signees were physically located in the Pacific time zone.
That's a 2-hour temporal gap. You cannot physically be in 2 time zones at once.
It mathematically proves forgery. And the audit captured something even more damning: simultaneous signature routing. The metadata showed that 40-page legal contracts were opened, reviewed, and fully executed in a 0.8-second window.
A 0.8-second window. I mean, a human being cannot even scroll to the bottom of a 40-page document in less than a second, let alone read it and legally sign it.
Exactly. That 0.8-second timestamp proves the use of an automated script, what in tech is called robotic process automation, or RPA.
Unbelievable.
It wasn't a human signing a paper. It was a machine executing a theft on a loop. By transmitting these forged digital artifacts across state lines via the internet, the architect logs they committed irrefutable, fully documented federal wire fraud.
It is stunning. He caught them because they didn't realize the system they used to forge the documents was keeping a perfect, microscopic record of their crimes. Let's look at the other side of the funding. 31 U.S.C. Section 3729, the False Claims Act. How does a nonprofit fall under this?
The False Claims Act imposes massive liability on persons and companies who defraud governmental programs. Phoenix CDS receives state and federal HUD funding, and that money is specifically earmarked for supportive services and crisis mitigation.
But the architect proves they weren't providing those services.
The intelligence profile, compiled in the monolith, states that Phoenix CDS engaged in systemic ghost billing. They billed the federal government for high-level care coordination, while, according to the ledger, their agents literally slept on shift, appeared intoxicated, and willfully ignored severe medical endangerment in the facility.
They were pulling down public funds while allowing the residents to reach a state of catastrophic failure. They were invoicing the government for ghosts.
Yes.
And obviously, when a civilian starts compiling this level of forensic data, the people being audited start to panic, which brings us to the retaliation. 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, witness tampering and obstruction of justice. What happened when the syndicate realized they were being tracked?
The physical environment became incredibly hostile. In November 2024, AJ and Devin had to flee their location in sheer terror, moving to an unfurnished property on Broadway Street to establish a new perimeter.
Right.
But prior to Thanksgiving, the ledger logs that a syndicate operative, designated in the text as Target Alpha, physically stole AJ's phone and a 64-gigabyte SanDisk SD card.
They didn't just hack him, they stole the physical data storage.
Yes. They knew the architect was functioning as a federal whistleblower. He was actively compiling the metadata for the FBI. The theft of the device and the SD card was a direct, physical attempt to destroy the digital evidence of their wire fraud and ghost billing. It is a textbook definition of obstructing an impending federal investigation.
But the retaliation didn't stop at stealing an SD card. This leads to the final statute in this section, 18 U.S.C. Section 1951, the Hobbs Act, which prohibits actual or attempted robbery or extortion affecting interstate commerce. How does this apply to the situation on the ground?
The syndicate executed extortion through physical fear and environmental deprivation. The ledger details an armed standoff in Beaverton, Oregon, involving the interstate transport of a stolen blue Chevy truck by the syndicate.
Okay.
This kinetic breach was designed to extort assets from the family, but perhaps more terrifying is the environmental duress they deployed during what the architect calls the Winter War.
Explain the Winter War.
This is also actionable under the Hobbs Act and state criminal neglect statutes. In December 2024, the document logs that Target Alpha initiated illegal, malicious winter utility shutoffs at the Broadway Street property where AJ and Devin had sought sanctuary.
So they shut the power down.
They terminated the electricity on December 5th and the water on December 6th.
In the middle of an Illinois winter?
Precisely. They weaponized the physical environment. By freezing the victims out, they were attempting to extort their compliance and force them to abandon their secure perimeter. It is biological extortion.
You know, I have to push back here, because this is the part that always baffles me when we look at these massive systemic failures. When the syndicate commits this level of wire fraud, when they forge DocuSign metadata with robotic scripts, when they ghost bill the federal government, and when they shut off utilities in the winter, how do they possibly assume they will not be caught? Do they think they are invisible?
They don't think they are invisible. They think you are too weak to see them. This goes back to the concept of procedural exhaustion. The entire global administrative grid is designed with inherent massive friction.
Right. If you've ever tried to dispute a medical bill or cancel a gym membership, you know how exhausting a tiny bit of bureaucracy can be.
It drains your will to live.
Exactly.
And multiply that by 10,000. The syndicate assumes that a civilian, especially one dealing with housing instability, managing a neurodivergent dependent, and fighting off utility shutoffs, will simply never possess the cognitive processing power or the free time to decrypt IP routing logs, or map XML data, or execute an open-source intelligence audit.
They assume the target will be so exhausted by the daily metabolic cost of pure survival that they will simply submit to the extraction.
They thought they were building a fortress out of paper, assuming the architect didn't have the energy to find a match.
But they were wrong, because the architect didn't fight them as an exhausted human. He built the 20-director AI command suite. He automated his own audit to bypass their procedural exhaustion.
He cloned his processing speed and audited them into absolute oblivion.
While he was building this intellectual fortress, the physical reality for his family was breaking down. We need to examine the profound physical toll this took on the household. This brings us to what the ledger calls the medical and environmental siege. The document logs a deeply disturbing event referred to as the hospice trap.
This section involves the matriarch of the family, Irma Martinez. The ledger details that the fiduciary archons, specifically Phoenix CDS and a medical facility identified as Lacan, engaged in the deliberate denial of emergency transit and respite care for Irma while she was actively on hospice.
The ledger refers to this as biological extortion and a terminal theft of time. Those are heavy phrases. What exactly did the agencies do?
Phoenix CDS and Lacan knew the matriarch's terminal status. Yet, according to the document, they hid behind arbitrary bureaucratic territory limits to justify separating his son from his dying mother.
I see.
They denied the medical transport not because it was physically impossible, but because it was procedurally convenient for them. It preserved their operating budget.
So they chose a minor administrative boundary over a dying woman's dignity.
Yes. And by doing so, they forced the crushing physical, emotional, and financial burden of 247 terminal caregiving entirely onto AJ. They stole irreplaceable final moments from a family, utilizing systemic medical neglect as a tool for financial and emotional exhaustion. It is the ultimate fiduciary breach.
And the medical siege escalated even further against the architect himself. The document outlines a catastrophic event called the sepsis protocol failure at the Peoria County Jail. The ledger logs explicit 8th and 14th Amendment violations. Provide the context for this.
The 8th Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishment, and the 14th guarantees equal protection under the law. The ledger states that following an unlawful detainment, which the architect proves was based on a falsified municipal pretext, AJ was brought to the jail.
Okay.
He was stripped, placed in a suicide smock, and locked in an isolation cell that was actively contaminated with human feces.
A completely hostile, biologically dangerous environment.
And it gets worse. At the time of his arrest, AJ had sustained a severe animal bite on his body. The jail staff deliberately ignored this wound. According to the ledger, this was not an oversight. It was malicious indifference.
They left it untreated.
They denied him basic medical care and antibiotics, causing the untreated wound to escalate into massive, life-threatening tracking sepsis while he was locked in the cell. Concurrently, the system also targeted Devin. The ledger notes that Devin, a highly vulnerable asset, was denied his legally prescribed psychiatric medication for over 48 hours while in state custody.
The system actively degraded their biology. AJ survived this systemic failure, but just barely. The ledger notes he endured a 5-day emergency hospitalization from December 28, 2025 to January 1, 2026 to treat the sepsis.
And this is exactly where the architect's use of the asphalt Gothic narrative becomes crucial to the legal filing.
That is exactly what I was thinking. If this were a standard police report or a hospital intake form, it would just say, inmate treated for infection. How does the asphalt Gothic aesthetic record this systemic neglect differently, and why does that matter legally?
A standard institutional report sanitizes the violence. It reduces a near-fatal case of tracking sepsis to a sterile medical incident. It removes the blame. But the asphalt Gothic narrative captures the visceral horror and the physical reality of what it takes to survive that.
It puts you there.
It documents AJ walking barefoot out of the hospital into the freezing Peoria winter. It describes the cold concrete, the physical friction of the environment, and his absolute psychological refusal to be broken.
By forcing the reader or the federal judge to experience the sensory reality of the trauma, it changes the context of the event.
Exactly. It proves specific intent. When you read the asphalt Gothic reality, you realize the system did not make a paperwork mistake. Its intent was to kill or permanently break the chief security architect. The narrative proves the malice aforethought required for the highest level of civil damages.
Which brings us to the conclusion of this live audit. The ledger mandates that having proven the crimes, we must now pivot to the exact mathematics of accountability. The era of chaos, the era of surviving on the grid, is over. The document shifts into a phase it calls absolute ruin.
Under federal and state law, Trauma and deprivation of rights must be monetized to enforce accountability. The fiduciary archons, the syndicates and corrupt agencies, operate strictly on financial logic. They understand nothing else. Therefore, the Vanguard counterstrike must dismantle their ledgers.
We start with what the author calls the labor extraction.
The architect audited the exact amount of time he was forced to spend defending his perimeter. Because the state systems failed, and in fact attacked him, he was forced to act as an uncompensated fiduciary conservator, a paralegal, and a pro se litigant.
Right.
He mathematically quantifies this in the ledger as 1,555 hours of contractor-grade, highly specialized legal and administrative labor.
He is invoicing them for the time he spent fighting them. At what rate?
He bills it at a conservative legal and administrative rate of $150 per hour. That equates to exactly $233,250 in stolen labor. This is highly actionable under legal doctrines like unjust enrichment and quantum meruit. The syndicate forced him to do the job they were supposed to do. They stole his time, and they are legally obligated to pay for it.
But $233,250 is just the baseline labor. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the final number. The Vanguard restitution equation at the end of the monolith demands a total of $33,394,040. I need you to break down the exact mathematics of this absolute ruin. How does he bridge the gap from a few $100,000 to $33 million?
Yet it's a fascinating application of federal law. We begin with the initial fiduciary extraction. The ledger documents the original $250,000 trust hijack from the Lucinda O. Hernandez estate. Then, the architect applies the multiplier found in 18 U.S.C. Section 1964.
The RICO Act.
Under the Civil Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, Civil RICO, victims of a racketeering enterprise are statutorily entitled to treble damages. That means the base extraction is automatically multiplied by 3. That brings the trust extraction alone to $750,000.
Then he adds the compensatory damages for everything else they endured.
Yes. He adds the $233,250 in labor equity. He adds conservative estimates for the property deprivation, the utility sabotage during the Winter War, and the forced relocation costs, which adds roughly another $150,000.
Okay.
Then comes a calculation for non-economic compensatory damages. The extreme pain and suffering from a documented 30-minute lethal threshold assault, the CPTSD inflicted on Devon, the false imprisonment resulting from the weaponized 5150 hold, and the profound medical negligence of the hospice trap and the sepsis protocol failure.
That's a massive list of damages.
Given the multi-generational timeline and the severity of the constitutional breaches, this baseline is calculated at $2,500,000.
And then the hammer drops. Punitive damages.
Exactly. Because the architect's malice audit and the asphalt Gothic narrative proved specific intent, malice aforethought, and depraved indifference, the court is authorized to levy catastrophic punitive damages. The architect applies a multi-million-dollar multiplier against the combined economic and non-economic harms.
The goal being total liquidation.
The stated goal is to financially bankrupt the perpetrators and ensure they can never weaponize the system again. Factoring in what he calls the ongoing daily friction tax for their failure to immediately settle, the total financial demand reaches exactly $33,394,040.
I have to ask, because when people see a number like $33 million, they assume it's just posturing. Is this $33 million figure symbolic? Is it just a literary device to show the scale of his anger?
The author makes it exceedingly clear. It is not symbolic in the slightest. It is a literal, clinical, mathematically exact invoice generated by the Vanguard restitution equation. It is designed specifically so that no judge, no federal auditor, and no syndicate lawyer can argue with the math. The federal statutes dictate the RICO multipliers, and the 450-page monolith provides the incontrovertible metadata to prove the base damages. In the architect's view, this is the exact capital required to permanently secure the biological perimeter around Devon Molenhaupt and the Peoria Hub.
And he doesn't just name the overarching agencies in this invoice. The architect names the specific enforcers who executed the ground-level attacks. We must look at the specific Peoria police officers logged in the ledger.
The document explicitly names Officer Yackey and Officer Matthew Butterfield.
Officer Yackey and Officer Matthew Butterfield.
The ledger formally logs them as active participants in the physical breach of the Peoria Hub. The architect logs they acted as armed proxies for Heather Hackman's illegal warrantless extraction. According to the document, they bypassed objective law enforcement protocols and violated the Fourth Amendment under the color of law. The ledger confirms that all body cam footage, dispatch audio, and terminal records associated with these officers have been permanently locked into the federal evidentiary record by the architect. Their actions are now inextricably tied to this $33 million federal audit.
We have spent the last hour mapping the architecture of the Aegis monolith. We have traced the allegations of trauma, decrypted the metadata of the wire fraud, and calculated the mathematics of absolute ruin. Looking at the entirety of this 450-page document, what is the legacy of the engine of healing?
The successful compilation of this 450-page monolith marks a total transformation. Arthur J. Martinez evolved from a vulnerable victim on the California asphalt grid, surviving predatory networks and institutional erasure, into what he calls the quantum architect of the Peoria sanctuary.
He transcended it.
He built a mental and digital framework, the 20-director AI command suite, to absorb 40 years of systemic friction. And he successfully converted it into what he believes is an invincible legal fortress. Within these pages, the Ontiveros and Mayan syndicates are forensically mapped. Phoenix CDS is exposed, and the safety of his family is mathematically secured.
And the document ends with a final mandatory directive. It is a direct, somber call to action aimed squarely at the federal authorities.
The architect addresses the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice directly. His stance is that the evidence of federal wire fraud, conspiracy against rights, witness tampering, and constitutional deprivation under the color of law is fully documented, forensically verified, and incontrovertible.
The ledger is locked.
The 450-page monolith is the ledger, and the ledger is locked.
The document delivers a stark warning to the DOJ. If they fail to execute their statutory mandate immediately, if they choose procedural exhaustion or willful blindness over federal enforcement, the author states the system will face the consequences of total public exposure.
He states that the Vanguard will initiate what he calls the saturation pulse, disseminating the unredacted ICO matrix across the global internet. The era of plausible deniability, according to the architect, is dead. He holds the receipts. It is a remarkable, unprecedented way to challenge the legal system. He's demanding that the machine work, or he will break the machine with its own data.
It is a fascinating document that forces us to question how justice is actually accessed in this country. And it leaves you with the core tenet of the Vanguard, the absolute truth forged in the asphalt Gothic reality. When institutional chaos tries to write your history, when the system uses its own rules to suffocate you, you cannot ask for permission to survive. The only survival strategy is to become the machine that audits the machine.
Santa Cruz, midnight, the California grid. You thought you could take the ride? You thought I was a ghost. Watch this. Cartel hitmen waiting in the alleyway, looking for the bounty that they thought that they could make today. Stole the car, took the wheels, thought I wouldn't make a deal, but I'm coming down the boardwalk, crushing everything of steel. You sent the shooters, but they didn't know the target was a private eye vigilante running through the market.
The velvet on my seat is worn and red, like all the pretty futures that I've shredded. From my estate on the hill, the world is small, just standardized faces waiting in the hall. A platinum life, a crystal glass veneer, I haven't felt remotion in a year. And why should I? The ledger's looking fine while I trace your fate along a jagged line. In the eyes of the judge, the scales are a toy. A little bit of chaos is the only joy. Swing the hammer, let the truth hit the floor, iron door. It feels so good to the innocent shatter. Because in the eyes of the judge, you simply don't matter. In the eyes of the judge, you simply don't matter. Don't talk to me of evidence or proof. I prefer the architecture of the roof. It's high and arched, the marble's white and cold, just like the little lies that I have told. You're just a file, a face, a glitch upon the grid. I don't even remember the things that I did. A signature, a stamp, a life simply erased, with a dry martini and a smile on my face. In the eyes of the judge, the scales are a toy. A little bit of chaos cross is the only joy. Swing the hammer, let the truth hit the floor, iron door. It feels so good to the innocent shatter, because in the eyes of the judge, you simply don't matter. You simply don't matter. Guilty or not, it's all the same to me. I am the lock, I swallowed the key. Look up at the bench and see if I care. Look up at the bench and see if I care. In the eyes of the judge, the scales are a toy. Swing the hammer, let it shatter. Swing the hammer, let it shatter. Case closed. To the window, the dockets are full. The plea bargain engine is under full pull. Storatory minimums, a technical debt, a docket number punchline you'll live to regret. Your due process entitlement, a waiver of right, will dispose of this matter before the noon light. Processing human in industrial stacks, converting the file to the plea factory facts. Welcome to the docket, we've got quotas to keep. The pile of your paperwork is 6 stories deep. Give us the plea and we'll clear the whole floor. Docket number 0, we don't know you no more. System is running, the disposition is done. We process the many and we're bored of the one. The caseload is bloated, the statutory clock. We're moving the cattle directly to dock. A criminal disposition, a stamp on the head. Processing life while the context is dead. Administrative efficiency, the pride of the state. Plea bargain futures at a discount rate. 1 minute to midnight, the ledger is light. Docket number 9 is a ghost in the white. Welcome to the docket, we've got quotas to keep. The pile of your paperwork is 6 stories deep. Give us the plea and we'll clear the whole floor. Docket number 0, we don't know you no more. System is running, the disposition is done. We process the many and we're bored of the one. Violent, docketed, plea dispose. Caseload rising, everybody goes. Waiver of rights, it's Mr. and Blight. In the plea factory, no one sees the light. The static is coming, the processing starts. Removing the numbers and breaking the hearts. Docket number, file, file, file. Welcome to the docket, we've got quotas to keep. The pile of your paperwork is 6 stories deep. Give us the plea and we'll clear the whole floor. Docket number 0, we don't know you no more. System is running, the disposition is done. We process the many and we're bored of the one. Next. Good morning, darling. Wipe that look from your face. I'm the new legal resident of your private space. I heard you built a sanctuary, I heard you built a home. So I brought 1,000 signatures to pick apart the bone. I'm the fiduciary phantom, I'm the ghost in the machine. I'm the cleanest looking thief that you have ever seen. I don't need a crowbar and I don't need a mask, just need a courtroom and a simple little task. Oh, it's a fiduciary breach and the wine is oxblood red. I'm billing you for every single word that you just said. It's misprision in the daylight, it's a high society heist. I'll sell your soul for silver, then I'll have it double priced. You call it your inheritance, call it management fees. I'll bring the whole foundation to its ministering knees. I'm acting ultra vires, but I'm doing it with style. Hide speeches. I'm the king of the delay. I'll watch you wither in the static while I'm looking the other way. It's for your own protection. It's for your own good. I tell you the truth, but I'm not sure I should. Oh, it's a picture that she preached, and the wine is Oxford red. I'm feeling you for every single word that you just said. It's misfeasance in the daylight. It's a high society heist. I'll sell your soul for silver, then I'll have it double priced. Just the appeal? Oh, I misplaced that months ago. But don't worry, I've already billed you for the search. Get gone.